All right, guys, I want to show you a clip here. This is Jeff Stein. He is with the Washington Post. He covers Capitol Hill, and he, I think, does a pretty good job of getting some inside information for us and sort of telling us where things are when bills and things like that are being negotiated. He went on Breaking Points to talk about how the Republicans are planning to try to push back on Biden's cancellation of some tiny amounts of student debt. Apparently, this is a pretty unanimous position among Republicans, and they are trying to go the legal route to essentially say that Biden did not have the authority to do what he has done. And some of the legal dynamics are kind of interesting here, so I wanted to show you guys this clip. This, again, Jeff Stein on Breaking Points.
Joining us now is the one and only Jeff Stein. Great to see you, Jeff.
Good to see you, man.
Thanks for having me back on, guys. Really appreciate it.
Got to work in today. Excited about that. Let's go ahead and put your latest reporting here about the Republican plan to use the courts to block Biden's student loan debt relief. Let's go ahead and put that up on the screen. Headline here is Republicans are readying lawsuits to block Biden's student debt plan. GOP attorneys general, top lawmakers, and conservative groups are discussing legal options, alleging the White House's move to cancel student debt is illegal. What are they looking at here, Jeff?
So when the White House announced its student debt plan, there was this question of how are they going to defend this? It's a huge unilateral action, a huge expansion of executive authority. And there's a question of, how, can they do this without Congress? The White House cited a law that Congress passed after the 9/11 attacks in 2003 that gave the president, they say at least, broad discretion over the student loan portfolio, essentially. And Republicans are saying that the context in which that law was passed was clearly emergency measures after 9/11, not an attempt to allow the president to completely write higher education law. So that's what they'll be focused on. But as we can discuss, the critical issue for Republicans, according to the legal analysts I speak to, is not necessarily even that question about whether the 2003 law can be justifiably cited. I think a lot of legal analysts think that Republicans may have a winning argument there. The key question for Republicans is going to be, can they prove or find someone with standing, someone who can bring the case forward and say that they are legitimately adversely affected by this and get the case heard by the courts? That might actually be the bigger obstacle to getting this overturned for Republicans. And obviously, we should talk about the consequences for tens of millions of people who would be affected.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing I was reading, which is that, as Ted Cruz pointed out, you need to kind of just explain. You need a student loan debt servicer who's not for the government. Like, who exactly would the plaintiff be in the case?
So this is exactly the right question, because according to the Republicans I've talked to, they're sort of searching high and low for the right person that could be this person with standing, their dream plaintiff. And the reason they're doing that is because it's actually harder than you think to bring a case alleging that the president has violated the Constitution. As I said, you need this plaintiff to get the courts to hear the case. It's pretty clearly established, and Ted Cruz has admitted this, or acknowledged this, I should say, that someone who's a taxpayer or someone who didn't get their student loans forgiven, or someone who never took out student loans, the courts are pretty unlikely to look at that as a justification for bringing standing. And so you need someone who shows that they were adversely harmed, and not in this sort of general, maybe my taxes will go up in some vague, indirect way, or maybe, I should have qualified this, but I didn't. Or even, the other argument that Ted Cruz had sort of been flirting with was, maybe we can find someone who's a current student, didn't qualify for student debt forgiveness, but their tuition costs, one could argue, will go up as a result of the cancellation. Maybe that's a plaintiff. And Cruz has sort of said that he doesn't really think that option is going to work either. And so what Cruz is now suggesting, and he said that he spoke to a top conservative legal analyst who's likely to argue this in front of the Supreme Court, is that they'll look for a student loan servicer. The problem with that, as you were alluding to, is that the student loan servicers have lots of business in front of the federal government. So you need one of them to take the political risk or the financial risk themselves of saying, this fight, we're going to lose so much business from this that we're willing to potentially directly antagonize our main clients. And that is going to be, I think they'll find someone, but that's the challenge for the conservative legal movement right now.
Got it.
That's all very interesting. Well, to your point about how Republicans feel like they might have a decent case here, you spoke with an analyst who is in support of student debt Cancellation, who said, if they keep going with this argument, with the particular justification that they use to go ahead with student loan debt relief, and this interpretation of the statute is likely they will lose 6-3. It's possible they could lose by more than 6-3. I foresee this good policy being rightly struck down by the courts on legal terms. Why did they use this 2003 statute rather than using the statutes that have used previously by presidents to justify all manner of student loan debt relief, albeit more targeted student loan debt relief? But why did they decide to use this particular justification? And are they sort of locked into that, or can they change their mind and come up with a different legal justification?
It's a great question. So the professor you're alluding to, Professor Jed Sugarman, whose name just stuck with me because it's quite colorful.
It's a cool name.
He was making the point that, sort of what you were explaining. In 1965, Congress passed a law that gave the president lots of authority over student loans. And he's saying, if this 2003 law can be challenged on the grounds that it's not really an emergency anymore, why didn't the White House just cite this 1965 law that gives the president broad authority and is not clearly based in post 9/11 statute? And the speculation among the legal analysts I've talked to is that someone in the DOJ found some reason, there's a bit of a mystery that I haven't quite gotten to the bottom of, that someone in the DOJ or the DOE in the Department of Education has discovered that the courts are not likely to look favorably on the citation of that 1965 law because it really isn't explicable. And what Sugarman and other legal analysts are saying is the White House still has time, that the Department of Education hasn't put out its final guidance yet. This has not really begun moving. And the White House could still come out and say, this 2003 law is important, but we should also keep in mind that even if it was invalidated on those grounds, there's this 1965 law that we can cite, and we should go with that. We haven't heard that yet. I spoke to Lawrence Tribe, who's a Harvard law professor that the White House talks to a lot. He also said, we should also just throw out this 1965 argument because why not? But the fact that they haven't, they're a really smart and a huge team of people working at the DOJ, and it's kind of inexplicable to me that they would just miss this. I could find it, and I don't know anything about the law, so I'm sure there's some justification there.
So then my last question then is the White House. Do they see this as a threat? Were they aware of it? Are they preparing for it? How much is this on their radar for something they consider a major achievement on their part?
Well, it's a tough thing to answer because some of the legal analysts I was talking to were saying that if you look at Biden's speech, what he gave when he was introducing the student debt forgiveness plan, there's basically, I think, almost no mention of the idea that this is an emergency measure. I mean, he talked about the crisis in student loans and higher education, how broken the financing is, but he never really said, which the legal memo the White House released said, that this is partially motivated by the COVID crisis and that this is an extraordinary economic circumstance, which of course the White House doesn't want to go out there and say, we need to do this because the economy is a nightmare and people need help. He wants to say, we're taking corrective action to this long-running structural issue in the economy. But that might be sort of at odds with the legal argument that his attorneys are going to have to make in front of the Supreme Court. And the conservatives I'm talking to are saying, we're going to use Biden's words against him and say, the president never talked about this as a COVID emergency economic measure. He talked about it as sort of long-term social policy goals.
Do Republicans see a political risk here? Because you're talking about taking away a very significant and potentially transformative benefit from literally tens of millions of people. I mean, I'm sure you spoke with people who will be impacted by this in a positive way. I've certainly read the accounts that you and other reporters have been sharing, and people are saying this is literally going to change my life. This is going to enable me to be able to get on the road towards home ownership or be able to start a business. This completely changes how I was looking at the near term and the midterm and the future for myself. That's a very difficult position to be in politically, to then say, nope, we don't like it. We're going to fight tooth and nail to take it away from you. So are there any voices on the Republican side that are saying, guys, maybe we should just let this one go?
No, I have not heard a single Republican say we should just
And so
let this one go.
What's their political calculus?
I think that's like a genuine ideological conviction here. I mean, I know obviously politics is everything in this town, but I think there's a real revulsion to the premise of this policy. I don't know if you guys share this. I'd be curious for your take, but intensity of emotions that the student loan fight provokes is on par with anything I've ever covered, from people who feel like this is, not nearly enough, to people who say that this is a slap in the face of hardworking Americans. This is just such a fraught issue. And I think Republicans are really committed to the idea that, that this is a bailout for people who don't deserve it. And the polling, from what I can tell, has been pretty good for the Democrats. Like, Biden has had a really serious and meaningful bump with young voters since this was announced. Maybe there's other things that are part of that, but that's a big change that the White House is really excited about. And the Republicans willing to fight this. I think they just really don't like student debt cancellation.
I think you're right.
And they're hearing from people who are also really, really pissed off about it. And I'm sure the comments on this YouTube video will be incredibly split, because that's how this has gone. So
don't make
I'm
the
just
mistake of
reading
reading them.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I would say politically, you're always going to.
You're very kind to me, honestly.
Good.
Well, I mean, you see it in and so I watched the way Sean Hannity was talking about this issue, for example, and they really see it as a moral issue, and so it does cut at this deep level. Politically, I always think the people who are actually gaining the benefit and now have something really directly to lose, obviously they have a much more vested stake than people who have an ideology and they sort of theoretically think maybe sometime in the future my taxes could be increased. That's why you see something like Social Security as being so difficult, and why Republicans have tripped on that landmine a million times and still seem to want to continue down that path, even though they fail over and over again. So yeah, I think politically at this point, it's hard to deny the evidence that for young voters, this was a huge boon for Biden. Their approval rating of him has completely flipped. He was dramatically underwater. Now he has a positive, favorable rating with youngest cohorts of voters, as I've seen in the latest polls. So for Democrats, I think this has definitely been net positive thus far. And then Republicans have this, they have their own constituencies that they're responding to that are very powerful in Republican primaries, for example, and really have their ears, or maybe in the donor set, who are very, very upset and may push them in this direction. Even though, again, I think it's very politically perilous for Republicans to be in the business of trying to strip what is a significant and transformative benefit for tens of millions of Americans.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting, Jeff. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, I don't want to overstate this, but because I think, this is only one policy. It's kind of limited in some ways, but I think we're seeing the at least attempt of, during the Clinton, era, and when Hillary ran for president, there was sort of a lack of attention, I think a lot of Democrats felt, to delivering tangible material benefits for people and seeing if that would lead to more political success. And this could be a sort of a test case for that premise.
Yeah.
Indeed. A very interesting one to watch. Jeff, thank you so much for breaking it down. Great to see you, my friend.
Thanks, man.
Thank you, guys. Great.
Okay, so I think the extent to which Democrats are going to fight this is very up for debate. I don't think that the Democrats, even when they actually are ideologically in favor of doing something, and I do think at least a portion of the party is very much in favor of canceling at least a means-tested miniature version of canceling student debt. I think what Democrats will often do is think that they're going to get credit for trying, even if they know they're going to fail. We'll see what comes of this. There seems to be some question about whether Republicans can find a plaintiff that will actually qualify to take this up to courts. I certainly hope they don't. You guys, as critical as I was of how inadequate that policy is, it would pull like 20 million people or something out of their student debts, and it would put a substantial dent in many more millions of people's student debts. That is good, as inadequate as it is. I hope the Republicans fail here. But I think the extent to which the Democrats are serious about canceling student debt, I mean, all you have to do to sort of question that is to look at, it took them a year and a half to do something that just took a signature on a piece of paper. So I don't think it's at all unreasonable to question how committed Democrats are to actually fighting this fight. And, obviously, I think Republicans were going to fight this from the jump for a whole number of reasons. I think first and foremost, because I'm a little bit of a political cynic, I think first and foremost, the Republicans did not want to see Biden and Democrats get a boost in polling from this. And again, as inadequate as it is, and as much as it reveals that they spent a year and a half lying, saying they couldn't do this, and as much as there are political problems with such a pathetic half measure, obviously, like, taking debt away from tens of millions of people is going to probably help you at the polls. And I think Republicans don't want to see that. So they're going to fight this, even though that would also reflect pretty poorly on them to those voters. I think they're going to fight this out of spite for what Democrats were trying to do. I think it's very reasonable to question the extent to which Biden is actually committed to canceling student debt. I think his own actions create those questions. And obviously, the Democrats, even, as I said, even when they are ideologically in favor of something, tend to just play doormat anyway. So we'll see how much the DOJ decides they're going to fight this. We'll see if Republicans are able to find a plaintiff that qualifies, and then we will see if they are able to succeed taking this up the courts and arguing that 2003 law was specifically about 9/11. But it's really interesting too how Republicans and most Democrats favor the insane security state that came from laws like that 2003 law, but don't seem to want that executive power to help anybody. And I think it's worth noting that as soon as you try to use this bill for anything other than illegal surveillance or waging war against black and brown people around the world, or committing crimes against those people, or imprisoning them without trial in Guantanamo or Abu Ghraib, or as soon as you try to use it for anything that is not the worst imaginable thing, then there's this outcry. Oh, that's not what the bill was for. It's very revealing, right? So anyway, shame on Republicans here. Shame on Democrats for taking so long and doing something so inadequate. I hope that the Republicans fail in their attempt to undo this, but I also question the commitment of Democrats and Biden to actually fighting to maintain it. So we shall see what comes of that, but I thought that was a great breakdown there from Jeff on simply the mechanics of what's going on and how that fight looks like it's going to go down.